The sun blazed high above the remote military base, casting sharp shadows across the rocky terrain and glinting off rows of armored vehicles parked in the distance. A small group of civilians had arrived earlier that morning for what was supposed to be an educational tour, nothing more than a guided walkthrough of training grounds, equipment demonstrations, and a few photo ops. Among them was a young woman named Lena, in her early 20s, dressed casually in jeans, sneakers, and a light hoodie. She looked completely out of place among the uniformed soldiers and the towering military hardware. Her wide eyes scanned the scene around her, equal parts impressed and amused. She wasn't into weapons or war stories. If anything, she was here for the experience and the Instagram-worthy moments. Her friends were the adventurous type, always chasing something intense or outrageous. When someone had suggested applying for a civilian day pass to tour the military base, it sounded like a fun story to tell. Lena had rolled her eyes at first, but here she was, standing on dusty ground, surrounded by men and women in camouflage, some of them eyeing the civilians with faint smirks. As the tour progressed, they were led past tactical vehicles, barracks, and training areas. They watched a brief obstacle course demonstration and even got to try on a few lightweight helmets. The soldiers were relaxed, clearly used to this kind of thing, letting the public peek behind the curtain without revealing too much. Lena smiled and nodded politely, trying to stay interested, but much of the jargon was flying right over her head. Eventually, the group arrived at a long shooting range that stretched into what looked like an endless expanse of dirt and low brush. A soldier with dark sunglasses and a buzz cut stood behind a table set with a few carefully arranged firearms. He gestured to the group. "Welcome to the long-range section. This is where our marksmen train. Today, you'll be observing, but if anyone wants to pose with some of the equipment, you're welcome to." The others laughed and eagerly stepped forward, taking turns holding assault rifles and posing like action heroes. Lena stayed back, chuckling as her friend exaggerated a Rambo-like stance with one of the smaller rifles. Then the soldier turned and lifted something that made everyone fall silent. It was a massive sniper rifle, sleek, black, heavy, and intimidating. Just looking at it sent a chill up Lena's spine. It looked more like a weapon from a futuristic video game than something real people actually used. "This," the soldier said, "is the Macmillan TAC-50. It's a .50 caliber sniper rifle and one of the longest range weapons in the world. Effective firing range, around 2,500 meters. But under the right conditions, much more." Everyone gasped or let out low whistles. The soldier set it down gently on a padded rest, almost like he was laying a child to sleep. The rifle stretched nearly the length of the table. A nearby spotter gave a brief explanation of how it worked: windage adjustments, elevation, ballistic calculations, things Lena barely followed. But she leaned in a bit, intrigued despite herself. Someone in the group asked, half joking, "Can we try it?" The soldier grinned. "Not loaded, but you can hold it, sure. It's a beast though." One by one, they tried to pick it up. Most struggled. It wasn't just heavy, it was awkwardly long and needed careful handling. Then, just for fun, the soldier looked at Lena. "Wanna hold it?" he asked. She blinked. "Me?" He nodded. "Come on. You've been quiet. Give it a try. We'll support the barrel. You just get into position." Her friends cheered her on. "Do it, Lena." Laughing nervously, she stepped forward. Okay, I'll try." The soldiers helped her lie prone on the mat, showing her how to grip the stock and rest her cheek against the scope. The rifle felt cold against her hands. Heavier than she expected, but not impossible. The smell of oil and metal filled her nose. "Not bad," the soldier said. "You look like you belong there." Lena smirked. "Yeah, right. I've never even shot a paintball gun. First time for everything." She peered through the scope, scanning the distant, blurred shapes far downrange. What was supposed to be a silly moment for a few laughs suddenly didn't feel so silly. She squinted, adjusted her position slightly, and exhaled slowly. Her heartbeat quickened, not from fear, but from something else she couldn't quite name. Everyone else kept joking, taking pictures, not knowing that Lena, for the first time all day, felt totally still. The air was still and dry out on the long-range shooting field, with only the distant rustling of wind over the open land breaking the silence. The shooting range stretched as far as the eye could see, its far edge almost vanishing into a haze of heat and dust. A set of distant white markers dotted the landscape, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Standing near the group of civilians, one of the instructors began setting up the Macmillan TAC-50 on a tripod, his movements calm and precise, like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Lena had stayed near the rifle after her playful moment of holding it. She watched the instructors work, curious about what they were doing now. They weren't just showing off gear anymore, they were getting serious. A second soldier, wearing a headset and carrying a high-powered spotting scope, started laying out laminated wind charts and pulling out a small anemometer to measure the wind speed. Every tiny detail seemed to matter: humidity, temperature, angle of the sun. It wasn't just about aiming and pulling the trigger. It was science. It was math. It was art. One of the instructors, a tall man named Staff Sergeant Keller, walked over and began explaining the process to the group, gesturing toward the massive sniper rifle. "This is not something we just fire casually," he said, his voice carrying authority but also a hint of pride. "Long-distance precision shooting like this is more than pulling the trigger. It's a combination of perfect alignment, atmospheric calculation, bullet behavior, and deep familiarity with the weapon." Lena found herself listening more closely now. This wasn't just a show. This was a demonstration of discipline and control, the kind of thing that required a level of patience and skill she had rarely seen. Keller pointed downrange. "That white speck way out there. That's a steel target. It's placed at 2,950 meters. Almost 3 kilometers. A bullet takes several seconds to travel that distance. It drops dramatically, and the slightest wind shift can push it off course by meters. You can't see the target with your naked eye, but through the scope, it's just clear enough." Someone from the civilian group whistled. "That's insane. Has anyone ever hit something from that far?" The soldier beside Keller chuckled. "Oh yes. A few times. Mostly by elite snipers in combat conditions. But it's rare. And everything has to go perfectly. Even experienced snipers miss." Lena looked through the spotting scope offered to her by another soldier. Through it, she could see the faint outline of the target, a square metal plate standing against the dry, dusty backdrop. It looked tiny. Ridiculously small. She tried to imagine what it would take to land a shot on something that far away, and her brain almost couldn't process it. Keller continued, now crouched beside the sniper rifle. He explained how elevation adjustments on the scope accounted for bullet drop, nearly 400 feet of drop over that distance. He showed how windage knobs compensated for side winds. He even described something called the Coriolis effect, how the rotation of the Earth could subtly shift the path of a bullet across such a distance. Lena shook her head. "So basically, it's impossible without a supercomputer." The instructor grinned. "Close. But we do it with training, instinct, and constant practice. The spotter's role is just as important as the shooter's. Together, they make it possible." As the demonstration went on, Lena found herself more and more drawn to the process. It was nothing like the movies, no chaotic shooting, no glorified action. It was stillness, focus, calculation, and patience. Every piece of information had a purpose. The direction of the wind, the shimmer of heat rising off the ground, even the time of day, they all had a role to play. The spotter, a quiet man with a tattoo of a compass on his forearm, knelt beside the rifle and began calling out numbers. "Wind 6 miles per hour. 2 ticks right. Elevation, adjust for 2,800 meters plus buffer for humidity drift." Keller nodded and made the adjustments. Then he stepped back, motioning to the group. "Normally, only qualified personnel get to fire this thing. But today, it's not loaded, just a dry demo." That said, he looked around, his gaze settling back on Lena. "You've got a good prone position. Still want to try aiming downrange with live calibration?" The group laughed, but Lena felt something stir in her chest. The rifle no longer looked so foreign. She nodded slowly, surprising even herself. "I'll try," she said. A few of the soldiers exchanged glances, half amused, half curious. One of them smirked. "You might be the first civilian to ever aim at that range, even without a shot fired." Lena lowered herself behind the rifle again, this time not for a photo or a joke. Her eye pressed to the scope, her breathing slowed, and she began to understand the gravity of what she was about to attempt. The rifle rested silently on its mount, its long barrel pointed toward the far end of the range like the finger of a statue frozen in time. Lena lay behind it, her body stretched out along the mat, elbows steady, eye against the scope. The warmth of the metal seeped into her cheekbone. Around her, the low murmur of voices had softened. The earlier laughter and casual atmosphere now gave way to something more attentive, more focused. Even her friends, who had been giggling minutes ago and snapping photos, were watching quietly now, unsure whether to expect something serious or just another funny story in the making. Staff Sergeant Keller stood a few feet to her side, arms crossed, observing. He hadn't said much since she settled behind the scope. A different instructor, one of the spotters, leaned closer and whispered some brief instructions. Don't jerk the trigger. Breathe normally. Find your rhythm. Sight in at the top of your breath, then squeeze as you exhale. Let the rifle do the work. Lena listened, absorbing the words like a sponge, even though her heart was pounding like a drum in her chest. It was strange, she didn't know how to describe the mix of nerves and calm flowing through her. She wasn't a soldier. She had never even handled a real firearm until today. But now, with her finger lightly brushing the trigger and her eye peering through the scope at a target nearly 3 kilometers away, she felt a rare kind of clarity. Behind her, someone muttered a joke. If she hits that, I'm buying lottery tickets for a month. Keller cracked a smile but didn't look away from Lena. You never know, he said evenly. Sometimes, beginners surprise you. The spotter adjusted the scope slightly. Winds shifted a little. Small cross from the left now. Aim 2 marks off center. Let the earth rotate beneath it. Lena blinked, surprised by that last line. Seriously. The earth's spin. He chuckled. Dead serious. At this distance, even the planet gets a vote. The joke landed, but it didn't break her concentration. Through the scope, she could see it, a faint, square blur, white against the dry brown earth, still and unmoving. She took a breath, held it, let it out slowly. The scope was steady now. The trembling in her hands had vanished, replaced by a stillness she didn't even know she had in her. The soldier beside her gave a nod. Finger on the trigger. Not pressure, just contact. When you're ready, squeeze. No rush. Lena didn't respond. She couldn't. Her thoughts had gone quiet, her senses narrowed to the black ring of the scope and the faraway glint of metal in the distance. She remembered what the soldier had said earlier about the bullet taking several seconds to reach the target. It was like aiming at the future. Time slowed. Or maybe it just felt that way. Her breathing synced with the rise and fall of her chest, and everything else faded, the soldiers, the other civilians, even the weight of the rifle. All that remained was a strange, almost fragile awareness of the moment. And then she squeezed. The shot cracked like thunder, echoing across the barren landscape with a deep, resonant boom. Dust kicked up slightly around the rifle's muzzle. A few people flinched instinctively, even though they had been warned. The recoil rocked the weapon back against her shoulder, but she absorbed it with a surprising steadiness. For a second, nothing happened. Then another second passed. All eyes turned to the spotter, who tracked the path through a powerful scope with laser focus. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, just watched. Then he sat back, blinked, and looked at Keller. Impact, he said quietly. Someone behind them gasped. Wait, what? Another asked. The spotter leaned forward again, adjusting his view, then repeated more clearly. Direct hit. Center mass. The civilians stood frozen, not sure whether to believe it. Even the soldiers exchanged wide-eyed glances. Keller walked over to the spotter, took a look through the scope himself, then gave a single, slow nod. Lena sat up slowly, blinking as if waking from a trance. Did it hit? Keller turned to her with a look of both shock and deep respect. Yes, you hit it. The moment was silent. And then, all at once, the group erupted, stunned laughter, clapping, shouts of disbelief. Lena just sat there, wide-eyed, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The shot hadn't been random. She hadn't closed her eyes and guessed. She had followed instructions, trusted the moment, and let it happen. And against all odds, it had worked. The energy around Lena shifted. What had started as a casual, playful moment was now something heavier, sharper. As she lay behind the rifle, she could feel the weight of everyone's gaze pressing on her. Yet, it didn't make her nervous. Not anymore. Something inside her had clicked, as if the world outside had gone quiet and narrowed to the precise view through the sniper scope. The distant haze of desert heat shimmered in her sightline, but beyond it, the tiny square of the steel target stood waiting, solid and unwavering. A breeze kicked up, tugging at her loose hair as it slipped from behind her ear. She didn't move. The sun had shifted slightly, casting longer shadows across the range. Lena stayed focused, her fingers light on the stock, her breathing slower than before. The earlier jokes had died down. Even her friends, who had been casually teasing and whispering to each other, now stood still. The soldiers had fallen into an instinctive silence as if some unspoken rule of respect had kicked in. The spotter crouched beside her again, speaking in a softer voice now, no longer treating this like a novelty. Take your time. Your last shot wasn't just luck. Your hold, your breathing, your body alignment, it was textbook. She blinked, still not quite believing what had happened minutes ago. But something in his words gave her confidence. It wasn't magic. It was instinct mixed with careful listening, and maybe, just maybe, a natural sense she didn't know she had. Her heartbeat no longer raced. It beat steadily, rhythmically, like a drumroll before a performance. Through the scope, she tracked the flickering mirage of heat waves dancing across the distance. She asked, almost without thinking, "Is that the same target?" The spotter smiled slightly. "Same one." Winds shifted just a bit, right to left. Slight crosswind. "Hold 2 notches right again. Just like last time." "Copy that," she murmured. The words didn't sound like hers. They sounded like something she'd heard in movies, cool, confident, military-like. But it wasn't pretend anymore. She adjusted slightly. Not the rifle, her position. Her elbows dug in just a bit more, forming a tighter triangle. Her cheek rested more firmly on the stock. One deep inhale. She held it. Slowly let it out. Another. She felt grounded now, not like a tourist lying in the dirt, but like someone who belonged here. Keller watched her closely. His expression had shifted completely. The smile was gone. His brow furrowed, not in concern but in astonishment. He'd trained with soldiers who didn't fall into that kind of rhythm so quickly. There was something unusual about the way she handled herself. He stepped closer, not wanting to disrupt her concentration but needing to witness this moment up close. The rest of the group stayed back now. Phones were lowered. This wasn't a show anymore. She steadied her aim, letting her finger hover gently on the trigger. The metal was cool against her skin. The target hadn't moved. It stood, almost daring her to try again. The silence stretched around her like a blanket, warm and heavy. She asked, softly, "If I miss?" The spotter didn't hesitate. "Then you try again. But I don't think you will." Lena smiled faintly. The calm she felt wasn't cockiness, it was something different. Like meeting a part of herself for the first time. The one who didn't flinch, didn't fold, didn't doubt. Her finger touched the trigger. Another breath. Hold. Exhale. She squeezed. The blast rocked the quiet air once again, the powerful echo traveling across the barren stretch of land. A dust cloud puffed up around the barrel. Her shoulder took the kick like she'd done it 100 times. But she didn't lift her head. She waited. The spotter, already scanning through his scope, let out a long breath and smiled. Impact. Another pause. Then cheers. Not just from her friends, who were now half laughing, half screaming in disbelief, but from the soldiers too. Even Keller clapped his gloved hands together once, sharply. Lena sat up slowly. This time, her expression wasn't one of shock. She was still quiet, but there was a new kind of awareness in her eyes. She had aimed. She had listened. She had hit the target again. No one had expected it. No one, not even her. But here she was. Not just a girl on a field trip anymore, but something else entirely. The thunder of the rifle shot still echoed faintly in the distance, bouncing off invisible walls of rock and wind far beyond the range. For a few seconds after the blast, no one moved. The world felt frozen in that lingering moment of, what just happened? Lena remained motionless, her body still cradling the length of the massive sniper rifle, her finger relaxed now, resting beside the trigger guard. She kept her eye pressed to the scope, not daring to look away, not yet. There was a heavy stillness in the air, as if time itself was waiting for confirmation. Then came the voice, flat, clear, and irrefutable. "Impact," said the spotter, his tone more firm this time. "Clean hit. Upper third." The effect was electric. The air around them seemed to burst with disbelief, as gasps and murmurs rippled through the small group of onlookers. Someone let out a loud, "No way." Another muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." Her friends turned toward each other, jaws dropped, unsure whether to laugh, cheer, or simply stare in awe. But the soldiers weren't laughing. Keller stepped forward, kneeling beside Lena. His face was serious now, and his eyes studied her like she was an equation he couldn't quite solve. "Let me see your position," he said quietly. She moved slightly to the side, and he lowered himself behind the rifle, aligning his eye with the scope. He scanned the sight, then looked downrange through his binoculars for a long moment. When he stood again, his voice was low but resolute. "Confirmed. She's 2 for 2. The words hung in the air. 2 shots. 2 hits. Both from a range just shy of 3,000 meters. A feat that even most seasoned professionals would call nearly impossible. Lena finally sat up, blinking against the brightness of the afternoon sun. Her face was flushed, not from the heat but from the overwhelming weight of what she had just done. She looked at her hands, which had steadied the rifle like a second skin. They weren't shaking. Not anymore. "I hit it again?" she asked, still uncertain if everyone was messing with her. The spotter turned to her with a look that was equal parts impressed and amused. "That wasn't luck. That was execution. That was control." Keller crossed his arms, eyeing her with a calculating expression. "You ever fired a weapon before?" Lena shook her head slowly. "No, never. Not even in a video game." Another soldier let out a low whistle. "Well, that just made it even crazier." The others gathered around, some patting her shoulder, others simply staring. Her friends were wide-eyed, practically vibrating with excitement. "You're telling me she just beat every sniper video I've ever seen on YouTube?" One of them laughed. Keller didn't laugh. He nodded slightly, still watching Lena. "You hit from nearly 3 kilometers. Twice. That's not just rare, it's something most shooters never accomplish even once." Lena didn't know what to say. Part of her still felt like she was floating outside her own body, watching from a distance. She remembered every breath she took, every second before each shot. And the strange part was, it hadn't felt hard. It had felt natural. Someone offered her a water bottle, and she drank quietly while the others continued buzzing around her like bees. The instructors regrouped briefly near the scope and began replaying footage taken by the observation cameras downrange. Sure enough, the screen showed 2 direct impacts on the steel plate. The second shot had landed just inches above the first. "You grouped them," one of the spotters said, shaking his head in disbelief. "That's the kind of consistency we trained for years to achieve." Keller walked over and crouched beside Lena again. "I don't know what kind of background you have, if any. But I've seen elite shooters miss those targets over and over. You just nailed them back to back, cold." Lena gave a half smile, still absorbing it. "I don't have a background. I didn't even want to come today." He studied her. "You've got instinct. Something real." There was a pause. Then, as if compelled by something deeper, he added, "If you ever wanted to explore this further, we have programs. Training, testing, nothing forced. But if this isn't a one-time fluke, you might be sitting on a skill most people spend a lifetime chasing." Lena didn't answer right away. She glanced back toward the range, where the white target still stood in the shimmer of desert air, still, waiting, as if daring her to try again. And in her chest, she felt the quiet flicker of something she hadn't known was there before. Not pride. Not ego. Purpose. Lena sat on the edge of a folding metal chair near the observation tent, the sniper rifle now resting on its padded stand a few feet away. Her second shot had been fired nearly 20 minutes ago, but the tension and astonishment still lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Everyone around her was talking, theorizing, replaying the moment again and again like it was a glitch in reality they were trying to explain away. The soldiers had shifted from polite hosts to quietly intrigued observers. They watched Lena differently now, less like a civilian visitor and more like an anomaly. She wasn't wearing tactical gear, didn't speak in call signs or jargon, and yet she had done something most trained marksmen couldn't replicate. Not once, but twice. Someone had pulled up a tablet showing the downrange footage in slow motion. The group huddled around it, pointing at the moment the bullet struck the target. A few even leaned in to examine the bullet marks, one dead center, the other just above it. The grouping was tight enough to raise eyebrows. "She's not just guessing," said one of the younger soldiers. "That's form. You can't fake grouping like that." Another added, "I've seen guys go through 2 years of sniper school and never pull that off." The spotter who had worked beside Lena during the shots had become unusually quiet. He leaned against one of the gear racks, arms crossed, eyes narrowed in thought. When Keller approached him, the spotter shook his head slightly, still trying to make sense of it. "She processed everything I told her, once," he said. "She remembered the corrections, she remembered the scope hold, and then just executed. And not blindly. Like she could see the wind." Keller's jaw clenched slightly. Instinct. Or something deeper. Spatial sensitivity, wind reading, maybe even freak neurological wiring. Whatever it is, it's not normal. In the background, Lena sat with her water bottle half full in her hand, eyes cast down at the dry ground, hearing the murmurs, the whispers, the sideways glances. She wasn't offended. She understood it. If it had been someone else, she'd be skeptical too. But what haunted her most wasn't the disbelief from others, it was the certainty she had felt when she pulled that trigger. She hadn't hesitated. She hadn't hoped. She had known. Somewhere between the breath she held and the bullet's impact, she had simply known it would hit. She turned slightly as her friend Sarah sat down beside her. "Hey, you okay?" Lena nodded, offering a small smile. "Yeah, just trying to figure out what happened." Sarah looked at her carefully. "That wasn't luck, was it?" "I don't think so." Sarah glanced back at the soldiers. "They're looking at you like you're some kind of prodigy." Lena chuckled softly. "Feels weird. Yesterday I was trying to figure out how to rewire my toaster." They sat in silence for a moment, the desert wind rolling through, rustling canvas and dust. Lena's gaze drifted back to the steel target in the distance. It looked so small again, so impossibly far away. But now, she understood it in a way she hadn't before, its distance, its stillness, its challenge. A few minutes later, one of the senior officers approached with a tablet in hand. He wasn't smiling. His demeanor was calm, professional, but there was a focused intensity behind his eyes. "Lena," he said, standing just a few feet away. "Mind if I ask you something?" She stood, brushing her hands together. "Sure. You've never shot a rifle before?" "No, sir. Today was the first time I ever held one." "No hunting background? No military family?" "Nope. My dad's a dentist. Closest I've come to aiming anything is when I throw socks in the laundry basket." The officer nodded, looking down at the screen for a second, then back at her. "What you did, it's rare. Very rare. We have people who train for years to achieve that kind of precision, and even then, it's not guaranteed." Lena stayed quiet. He continued, "We have programs for civilians with unusual aptitude. Observation tracks, pre-screening, even advanced training if you qualify. We're not asking for a commitment. But if you're open to it, we'd like to run a few assessments." She blinked, stunned. "You want to test me? We want to understand how you did what you did. And if it's something that can be trained or enhanced." Lena looked out over the range again. The wind had picked up slightly, sending a fresh wave of dust swirling across the field. The world had changed since she arrived that morning. Or maybe she had. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. The officer nodded. "That's all we ask." Then he turned and walked away. She sat back down beside Sarah, the sounds of the range slowly returning to normal. But Lena knew nothing would be normal again, not after today. By the time the sun began its slow descent behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the dusty military range, Lena's story had already traveled far beyond the shooting field. A few short video clips, hastily recorded by the observers and one of her friends, had been uploaded to social media. Within an hour, they had begun spreading like wildfire. The footage showed a young woman in casual clothes lying behind one of the world's most powerful sniper rifles, calmly pulling the trigger, followed by a delay, a soft metallic ping in the distance, and then a stunned eruption of voices around her. What started as a quiet demonstration among a few visitors quickly spiraled into something much bigger. Inside the base's main control office, a group of officers reviewed the footage repeatedly. High-ranking personnel who hadn't even been on the range that day had begun gathering in small clusters, asking questions and reviewing Lena's background. Who was she? Was she trained? Was this a setup? A trick? But every answer came back the same. No experience, no military history, no prior weapons handling. She had shown up as a guest. Held the rifle for fun. Hit the target once. Then again. Both shots, confirmed on video, landed on a steel target at 2,950 meters, an almost mythical distance in the world of precision shooting. Back out at the range, Lena sat near the truck with a borrowed military field jacket draped over her shoulders. The temperature had dropped slightly, the dry wind cooling her sweat-streaked face. She sipped from a bottle of sports drink now, not water, at the suggestion of one of the instructors. They treated her with a strange mix of caution and admiration, like she was both a guest and a phenomenon. "You've got people talking in every building on base," said Keller, sitting across from her now with a tablet in hand. "Officers, trainers, intel guys. Nobody can believe it." Lena glanced at him. "I still can't believe it." He gave a short laugh. "Yeah, but you did it. Twice. And the second was even cleaner than the first." She looked down at her hands. They were dusty, a little raw from lying prone so long, but steady. The adrenaline had long worn off, replaced by a weird kind of mental buzz, like the world had shifted into sharper focus. Everything around her seemed louder, clearer, the crunch of boots, the flap of canvas, even the whir of a distant drone overhead. Her phone buzzed again, more messages. Notifications piling in. Her friend Sarah was still on a call with someone, probably retelling the story for the 100th time. Another friend was standing nearby, scrolling through Twitter with wide eyes. "Lena," she called, "you're already on 3 military meme pages. They're calling you, the civilian sniper." Lena groaned, burying her face in her hands. "Oh God." Keller chuckled. "Welcome to the internet." More instructors had started arriving to the range. Some brought paperwork, others brought questions. One man, older, wearing a badge indicating intelligence clearance, stayed for a while observing Lena without introducing himself. He didn't ask questions. He just watched. One of the snipers, a younger soldier named Diaz, approached carefully. "Hey," he said, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. I wanted to say that was incredible. Like, beyond incredible. I've been training on that exact system for 2 years. Closest I ever came to a hit at that range was 5 feet off." Lena gave him a soft smile. "Thanks. Honestly, I don't even know how it happened. I just followed what they told me." Diaz nodded. "Yeah, but following instructions and actually doing it under pressure. That's something else. That's talent." He hesitated, then added, "They're saying you might get invited to a test program. If they offer, you should say yes." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked back downrange. The white steel plate was still there, unchanged. But now it felt different, less like a target, and more like a doorway. Something had shifted in her today, and it wasn't going away. She turned to Keller. "If I did say yes, what happens then?" He studied her for a moment. "They'd run diagnostics. Reaction time, focus, brain mapping, muscle control. See if what you did was instinct or something deeper. And if it's real, they'll want to train you. Seriously." Lena nodded slowly. "And if I say no?" "You walk away. No pressure. No obligations. Just a really wild story to tell." She leaned back in her chair, staring up at the darkening sky. A jet streaked overhead, high and fast. She thought about all the versions of herself that existed before this moment, ordinary, unsure, quietly blending into the background. Now, everyone was looking at her like she might be something rare. Something valuable. And she wasn't sure what scared her more, the attention, or how right it felt. The evening had settled into a calm hush, the desert bathed in hues of orange and soft purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. The shooting range was mostly quiet now. The other civilians had already left, their excitement lingering only in the dust they'd kicked up on their way out. Lena remained, sitting alone on a bench near the observation tent, her arms crossed loosely, her eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of the steel target that had, somehow, transformed everything. She wasn't holding the rifle anymore. It had been carefully packed up by the instructors and returned to the secure storage facility. But she could still feel it, its weight, its cold steadiness, the way her body had settled against the earth when she looked through its scope. She could feel the breath she'd held. The moment of stillness before the shot. The silence right after. It wasn't the sound that echoed in her now, but the certainty. She had made the shot. Twice. And it had changed everything. A low crunch of boots on gravel broke her thoughts. She didn't look up. She already knew who it was. You still here? Keller asked, coming to a stop beside her. Yeah, Lena replied. Just thinking. He didn't sit right away. He stood next to her in silence for a moment, hands on his hips, glancing out over the darkening range. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to the bench beside her. Everyone's talking about you, he said finally. Command, Tech Division, even the medical unit. You made more waves in one afternoon than most people make in a year out here. I didn't mean to, Lena said softly. I know. That's probably part of why it matters. The silence stretched for a while. The wind picked up, rolling across the plain and tugging at the hem of her borrowed field jacket. A couple of floodlights flickered on across the range, illuminating the path to the equipment sheds. Somewhere far off, a lone coyote howled. They gave me a folder, Keller said, reaching into a side pouch and pulling out a plain black binder. He set it on the bench between them. Not official recruitment. Not yet. But an invitation. Initial assessment. Civilian aptitude program. You'd be flown out, tested, monitored. No obligation. You can walk away any time. Lena stared at it but didn't reach for it. What would they do with me? She asked. If I went, they'd try to understand how you did what you did. Run diagnostics, brain scans, muscle tracking. If it's natural talent, they'll train you. If it's something neurological, reflexes, perception, they'll study it. If it's just some insane moment of instinct, he shrugged. They'll try to replicate it. And then what? Keller looked at her directly now. Then it's up to you. You could walk away. Or maybe, you stay. Maybe you help train others. Maybe you become something more. There's no script for what you did. Lena finally picked up the folder, opened it slowly. Inside were a few cleanly typed pages, a formal invitation, logistics, contact details, confidentiality clauses. At the very bottom, a handwritten note in neat black ink. You have something rare. We'd like to help you discover what it is. She closed the folder and let it rest on her lap. I never thought I'd be here, she said. Not just physically. I mean, I never saw myself as someone who could do something like this. Most people don't, Keller said. Until they do. She looked at him then, the soldier who had handed her the rifle earlier that day like it was nothing, never expecting what would follow. He had seen her as just another civilian, someone passing through. Now he watched her like a riddle waiting to be solved. It felt natural, she admitted. Like my body knew what to do before I did. He nodded. That's what instinct is. She stood slowly, the folder still in her hands. The floodlights cast long shadows behind her. She looked once more toward the now barely visible target in the distance. It was just a square of metal, barely reflective in the fading light, but to her, it felt like the moment she'd crossed a threshold she never even knew existed. I think I'll go, she said quietly. Not because I want to prove anything. Just because I need to know. Keller smiled slightly. That's a good enough reason for me. They walked back together toward the main building, side by side in the cooling desert air. Behind them, the range lay still and silent, until someone, someday, tried to match what she had done. But Lena wasn't thinking about that. She was thinking about who she was yesterday, and who she might become tomorrow.